Welcome back to Networking Unleashed, Building Profitable Connections. I'm your host, Michael Forman, speaker, strategist, and believer that the right conversation can change your future. Today's episode is a game changer. If you've ever felt awkward walking into a room full of strangers and unsure of how to make the first connection, this one's for you. My guest is a true master at taking the fear out of networking and replacing it with a simple, powerful, practical step that can move you towards your next. Whether that's a new opportunity, partnership, or breakthrough. Get ready for real talk, actionable advice, and the kind of insight that turns handshakes into high impact connections. Let's dive in. Gisele, how are you today? And welcome to the show. And if you don't mind, give us a little bit about your background and what you like to talk about.
Sure. Michael, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here. A little about my background. I grew up in New York City, raised by my parents separated when I was single digits, divorced when I was single digits. So I was primarily raised by my mother and my grandmother in New York City, in Harlem, the old Harlem, not the new. And my mom always had me reaching for excellence, right? So everything, I'll never forget, like growing up, if I would get 100 on a test, I would be able to go to this little store in our neighborhood and get like a little prize. And even once she took the incentive away, I still wanted to be a superstar in terms of whatever it was that I was doing. And after college and all the things, she would always tell me, when you go to work, keep your head down, be the smartest person in the room. This is how you get promoted. And I was like, I get that. And then out of college, I go and work at, well, it was Anderson Consulting, is Accenture now. And I never forget the first time when I saw a networking opportunity. Someone had wheeled out like a bar after work. It's like a Friday. And I was like clutching my pearls. I was like, oh my God, people are drinking at work. I can't be seen doing that. So I'm like trying to be on the peripheries so that no one sees me. And I'm trying not to be seen with a drink in my hand. And then also numerous occasions where employees would say, hey, we're going out after work. You want to join us? I'm like, no, I'm so busy. I have so much to do. I don't have the time. How do they have the time for this? I just didn't see it was important. And then over time, Michael, I learned that what my mother told me wasn't exactly accurate about you get the promotion by keeping your head down doing the work. I was like, I saw a lot of people getting promotions, but I didn't see them having their head down necessarily. So just on my career journey, I learned that networking is not a bad word and that it can help take you from here to there. But I learned it at I feel like a late age. By the time I was 39 is like when it really cemented in. And because of that, I enjoy sharing what I've learned with others. I have a TEDx on the topic called Networking Made Easy. And I just figured, hey, I'm going to spread good cheer like you do in regard to the hows of networking with practical tips that people can use to really take the stigmatism and the fear out of it.
Fantastic. And I can understand, first of all, I come from New York. So I understand it. I come from Rockland County. It's about 30 miles north of New York City. And I spent my life, I moved down to Georgia about 7 years ago. It's a whole different life down here. But I find that the networking that you were talking about, it's true. Your mother was right. Okay. To a certain point, she was to get you started, to get you into the business world. But knowing what we know, it's the social activity, also keeping it in check. But that's what helps get you ahead. So let me just start off by asking, what's the most unconventional networking strategy you've ever used that actually worked?
Unconventional that actually worked. I
These are
would
fun
say
questions.
the most unconventional is recognizing people by doing something different about birthdays. And what I mean by that, with social media now, your birthday is everywhere. Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. To the point that it's almost overwhelming, right? That I can't even keep up with it all. And what I came up with, I was like, the field is really crowded. So I started doing these half yearly birthday acknowledgments. So if your birthday's in December, I'm reaching out to you in June and I'm saying happy half yearly birthday, Michael Forman. And when you do that, all of a sudden it's unconventional because, first of all, Michael, who's doing that? So it gives you the opportunity to actually stand out. And if you can be consistent in doing that, people come to expect it. And it's a way to submit yourself into the minds of others. And then to actually help make that automatic and automated, there is a this application that I use called Send Out Cards, where you can actually program it to send cards. You don't even have to you don't even have to think about the day. It just does it automatically for you. So I think also some people sometimes forget that networking is not just the physical, but sometimes you can use automation to help you as well.
I love that you send out cards. I used handywritten.com. Okay, it's the same concept, but handywritten.com is one that I use for my thank you notes. And I always use a thank you note for every event coordinator or something else because that gives that homey touch. That's part of my follow up that I always suggest because I have a secret sauce for the follow up and I tell everybody what it is. But I raise the possibility of getting a response, positive or negative, but I raised the possibility of a response to about 75%. Yeah, so it's really incredible. So we'll go over the secret sauce afterwards. Let me ask you another question. How do you recommend people overcome their initial networking anxiety or fear of rejection?
Sure. This is what I tell individuals because sometimes and this can be it's what I tell introverts, but it works for anyone. And one way to overcome the fear is to set a goal in mind. I happen to live here in St. Louis. It's a very generous region. So we have a lot of meal events, dinner events, receptions on the front end, and people always gathering. And sometimes it can be overwhelming when you see groups of people that appear to know each other that are chatting it up. And then you're like on the outside looking in. And what I tell people in that situation to take the fear out, find someone like yourself, right? So the other person that's in the room who isn't talking to someone is thinking the same thing you're thinking. Oh my gosh, don't want to do this, fearful of doing this. But when you're approaching someone that's in the same situation, it's not as difficult. And I can understand how it's difficult to approach a group of people who seem user friendly with each other. So that's one thing that I would suggest. The second thing is in these type of situations to take the fear out, give yourself a goal. Maybe that is you meet two people, three people, and that's it. And once you've done it, be done with it. And then you can just check the box and enjoy the rest of your evening the way that you want to enjoy it. But I think the important piece about that is if you focus on that two or three, then what's going to be important is what you were getting into before we were talking about handywritten.com is to make sure that you keep connected with that person somehow. We can talk about strategies to do that because once you've made that introduction, once you've broken that ice, do not be a one hit wonder. Make that work for you. And I feel if you do that at every event, you will build up a network, particularly if you follow up with them.
That's very true. And I always feel that the follow up is probably more important than even meeting the person, but it's how you follow up. So when you first approach that person in the networking event that's like you, think about something other than the networking event, other than, oh, something, Giselle, that's a beautiful blouse you have on. Say, oh, where'd you get that? And just break the ice that way. And you'll have a small talk, a laugh, and say, hey, who are you looking for around here? Oh, I'm just looking for XYZ. What do you do? And have them start talking about themselves because you and I both know that people love to talk about themselves. And I have something called FORM that I remember whenever I'm trying to build rapport with somebody. It's family, occupation, recreation, and a message. I just think of that word form. So I
And it
always,
goes with Forman. Isn't that
and it goes
interesting?
with Forman. That's right. So it's very easy for me to remember. Okay, so how about first impressions? What are your top tips for making a memorable first impression at networking events?
So one of those, it gets back to what you're sharing, that people like to talk about themselves. So one way to make an impression, if you're at an event where, because sometimes this does happen, where they give you a list of the people that are going to be there, right? So one way to make a great impression is to take that list and see if there's someone that you're interested in meeting. Then do what I call double click on that person. Go to the internet is our friend. There was a time when we didn't have this, but now that we do, use it to your advantage. So I'll go there, find out information about the people that I want to meet. So maybe I pick three or four, and I make sure I have their photo, look for them, and introduce myself. And individuals love nothing more than to know something about them. What a way to make an impression, because you've actually done some homework. So I would say that's one way to make an impression. The other is what you were saying, Michael, in terms of when you meet individuals. I like that form: family, occupation, recreation, message. And what was the M for?
Message, a message that you
Message.
can get
It
onto the
was
same
message.
level as them.
Correct. So what you want to do is, we surprisingly, you'd be surprised that you very likely have something in common with the other person. It's just a matter of actually uncovering what that is. So, to your point about the first impression and having these, what I call conversation starters, so to speak. And one thing you have in common, you're at the same event, right? So, what brought you here? So, that's something that you can talk about. I like the recreation part. What types of things do you enjoy? And once you know these things about other people, it then allows you to focus in on that thing and ask them particular questions about that. Make them know that you're sincerely and authentically interested in them as a person. I think that is a good way to make an initial impression, because people will remember that. Oh, I am into working with youth and sports, for example. And if I had a conversation with you about that, you'd probably remember that. And people are being bombarded with so much information today. So, in order for you to break that ice and make that impression, it needs to be something that they're going to remember. And it's more likely they're going to remember something related to something that they enjoy and that they love. And if you're on the same page.
That's very good, very astute, very good. I have to tell you, when you brought up youth sports, that's usually what I try to get to people, depending on their age, what I get them to, because I was a baseball manager for 16 years. I was an umpire for 3 years. I coached 3 years of football, basketball, because for my children, I did that. So if I can get them to the youth sports, I can have them talk all day long and I can give them something intelligent. But that's what I try to do. And one other thing that you said was you have to be authentic, right? Because what happens if you meet this person 3 months from now in a different environment? Are you the same person? Are you as authentic? And if you're not, that just shoots you in the foot right there. And that all, again, goes to your follow up and how important it is and how you do it. Let's move the conversation a little bit to online marketing or
Mhm.
online networking. How has digital networking changed the game? And what are some best practices for virtual connections?
So it's changed the game in that it helps you connect with people faster than you could in person in terms of like volume. So that's the plus. And it's so great you're asking me this, because we just did a podcast. I'm in higher education, and at my institution we just had a session about networking specifically related to online. So I'm so glad you're asking this question. And one way, so it changes the game in that it increases the number of people you can get to know. However, let's go back to your word authentic. Is it authentic? If you're going after quantity and you don't know the people that you're connecting to, I would suffice to say that it's not necessarily an authentic connection. And if you saw that person walking down the street, would you be able to have a dialogue, know something about them? You probably wouldn't. And I have to say, what gets my goat is this. LinkedIn is a platform that many of us use. People, I subscribe. Whenever you connect to someone, send them a note if you don't know who they are. Because it happens to me all the time. People will get linked, send me a note. I say, oh, not even, they'll just say connect. And then I look and I see, oh, they're connected to 20 people that I know. So in my head, I'm thinking, maybe I know them, don't remember them, and I don't want to say something that might turn them off. So then I go to 2 or 3 people, shared contacts, and I say, hey, Jim Smith reached out to me in LinkedIn. Tell me how you know them, or how do you know them? Because maybe that's how I know them. And they say, oh, I don't know that person. That is not helpful at all. So I pride myself on in LinkedIn, I would say a good 95% of the people I'm connected to, I'm going to know something about them beyond the fact that I'm connected to them. And let me tell you a secret, Michael, you can't tell everybody, but let me tell you, you and your listeners, I'm giving you this for free. And that is what I do is I always make sure in that first LinkedIn connection that I talk about how we met. For example, I just finished teaching an executive education class earlier this week. So there were people who just linked and I remembered them. So when I responded, I accepted and I said, it was so great having you in my inclusive leadership course in executive ed yesterday. So at least that starts with whenever I have to go back to that person, I know how we met. Then I look and see who else do we have in common. Ah, I see so and so. I know them this way. So just trying to further solidify. And then I often add, based on what you do, let me know how I might be helpful. I'm in the higher ed space. I work in inclusive leadership. However, I come from corporate Fortune 250 companies, being a P&L owner where I've ran businesses up to $800 million. So if there's anything that I can do to help you, let me know. Or if there's someone in my network who can be helpful to you, let me know. So it might be that. Or depending on if it's someone who I want to further advance the relationship with, I may say, how about a virtual coffee? Or how about a virtual tea? Whatever your favorite daytime beverage is. So that's how I believe that the online networking kind of changes the game. But I think it's up to us. It gets you so far, but I think it's up to you to make sure that relationship is authentic and to make sure that everyone that you add to your network, that you're adding value to them as well. It's really all about a two-way relationship. Any relationship that's one way, you can't use the word relationship because it's not.
That's true. And you keep going back to the follow-up of the person. And we keep stressing that the follow-up is just as important. And here's a little tip that I give my listeners probably every other podcast. But at a networking event, when you finally get their business card, on the back of their business card, write down the date, the name of the function, and something you talked about because that will help you in your follow up. Now, I was in the mortgage industry. I used to go to networking events. I was going with a shoebox filled with business cards. And I said, look how good I did. And I'm like, I didn't do well at all. Okay. But now, if you go to a 3 or 4 hour networking event, come home with about 15 or 20 business cards. But those are actually people you connected with that you're going to follow up with. And when you follow up using LinkedIn, I'm a big LinkedIn user, but you always find an article or something and attach it and say, look, I felt you might be interested in this. So,
I
anyway,
love that.
yep. So that falls right into my next question of follow up strategies. What's your foolproof method for following up after making a new connection? You went into that, but delve into a little bit further.
Sure. So this might be considered old hat, what I'm going to say I do. And I welcome you or any other listener to tell me how I can be more efficient at doing it. So, what I do, because I know if I don't calendar it or write it somewhere, it's not going to happen, right? So, what I do, I actually keep an Excel spreadsheet. And as I meet individuals, I create a cadence in terms of how often I'm going to get in touch with them. So say I'm going to touch base with this person quarterly. I'll put that in my spreadsheet. And then I'll even, when I first meet them, talk about how I'm going to do that. So therefore, I don't have to think about it when the time comes. So maybe when I get in touch with them 3 months from now, it may be that I know something that they're interested in. And like you, when you mentioned the article, that's another thing I like to do too. Google can be your friend or any other type of search engine. And you can put in whatever that thing is. Like I had a mentor who was into like triathlons. So I would put, and he would do them all over the world. So I would actually put that into a Google search and then have it let me know about these triathlons that are going on in different places around the world. And then I would just put myself a note to say, if I haven't gotten any lately, to just go online and see, are there any going on abroad? And then I can just send a note say, hey, I see this is going on in Spain. Are you participating? So that might be the first. The second might be the half yearly birthday, right? The third may be, how about you pick up the phone? I recognize that it's so easy these days to text, to email, but I do believe that nothing replaces just a voice. And even if you leave a voice note by way of text, it's a little different. So something a little bit different. Just say, hey, I was thinking about you, hadn't talked to you lately. And then maybe that fourth one is a virtual coffee. So I always just try to lay out a cadence in terms of the how. So that when that time comes, I'm like, oh, what do I do? What do I say? What have I done in the past? Then I have a record also of what I have done.
Have you looked at CRMs?
I have, but I haven't found one that I feel is simple enough. Talk to me,
Okay.
Michael.
I use HubSpot. Okay. Now they have a free version so you can get used to it and see all the makings of it. But look into HubSpot because that's what I use
Okay.
and it serves me pretty well. And that serves me well because of my follow up. Okay. And how I follow up with the people. And it has tasks so that I set a task. So all I do, the first thing every day is I go and I see all my tasks that I have to do for that day. And it just keeps going and going. So that is one that I would strongly suggest.
You heard it here first, listeners. HubSpot.
You heard it here first. Okay, quality versus quantity. How do you balance building a large network with cultivating meaningful relationships?
I get the word would just be intention. So I feel that if you have quantity, it's difficult to be intentional because it's too many people with which to keep up with. So the quality component comes out of I would call it the care and feeding that you actually give to your network by ensuring that they see that you see them, so to speak. Quantity, if you are going for quantity, I guess there are ways that you can make that work. So, say for example, if these individuals are all interested in a similar type of pastime, maybe something like a meetup, where you invite these individuals and add others. So I think for getting at big groups, if you find something that everyone has a commonality around and structure something around, that could be a way to get at quantity just based on a factor or two of interest. But I would suffice to say that's still a form of quality because you're actually giving them something of value. I think the
Yeah,
quantity, I haven't seen someone, you tell me, Michael, of how you make quantity successful in terms of networking.
quantity really goes, I equate that to customers. Okay. I have 3 widgets. You should buy them. You bought them. That's a customer. Okay. Ever since the pandemic, we've gone to relationships rather than customers. So that's where my mortgage thing was. I came back with a shoebox full of cards. That was the quantity. Now, the quality is where I've evolved to, and that's the 15 or 20 business cards. And I think you'll get so much further when you go quality over quantity. Now, for that's not for everybody, but for a regular salesperson that sells X, Y, or Z, quantity, that's perfect. But something for you and I, quality is a whole different ball of wax. Okay, let's go a little bit to personal brand. How important is personal branding in networking, and how can one effectively communicate their unique value?
Good one. Personal branding is also important. I think if we go back to your question before about making a memorable impression, branding is one way by which to do that. So, for example, I'm admiring, your tagline, building profitable connections, for example. I'm like, oh, wow, I can actually, I'll remember that, right? If I need something or a service that would align with that. I worked with a marketing company to help me with my branding. And when I think of all the things that I've done and how I combine what I do around inclusive leadership at work, pulling in this networking expert piece as well. At first, I thought they were so diametrically opposed. Oh, it's two different things. And by working with a marketing person, she helped me see a way to pull it together and came up with the tagline, I make organizations hum. And I said, that's perfect because it aligns with inclusive leadership at the office. It aligns with my TEDx on networking. And it aligns with when I think about when I was in corporate and I've been like a 5-time general manager running businesses. And I had a lot of success around turning around failed relationships. So I make organizations hum fits there. In higher education, I teach all about inclusive leadership, belonging. Again, that's really, it's people, right, that make organizations work. So again, I make organizations hum. So when I meet individuals and you introduce yourself, so I say, I'm Gisele Marcus. I am in higher education. I teach around inclusive leadership. And also, networking is something that along the way I've learned, and I have a TEDx on that topic. And really, I work at the intersection of inclusive leadership and networking, putting the two together. And my tagline is I make organizations hum. And oftentimes people say, oh, I really like that. And if you go to LinkedIn, you'll see that there as well. I think it helps you be memorable. So it's important to brand yourself. It's important to have that 30-second pitch so that people can understand what it is that you do and they can help identify how they can help you, and vice versa if they have a brand as well.
That's very good. And the 30-second elevator speech. Now, when I lived in New York, I had 2 networking groups that I created. I created 2, one in New York, one in New Jersey, and both had about 30 businesses in each. But the whole idea with that branding with your elevator speech is to not say the whole thing all at once. Say the first half and just make the other person say, what do you mean by that? Or what about that? And once you get them into the conversation, then you can expand your 30-second speech and go into further what you talk about. So that's all it is. You're just trying to grab the attention of them and have them ask you a question. Once they ask you a question, you really have them.
Yeah, I
Okay.
like that because really what you're saying is you're able then to make it more of a dialogue than a monologue.
Absolutely. 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 Okay. Networking mistakes. You ready? What
Ready.
what are some common networking mistakes that you've observed, and how can listeners avoid them?
One of them is asking people for things and you don't know them from a can of paint. And if you don't know what I mean by that, means if you don't know the person, you probably shouldn't be asking them for a favor, right? So sometimes people have not yet done what we're talking about, developed an authentic relationship, right? So let's say, for example, someone wants to get their child into some esteemed private school, right? And you know how hard that can be, right? The list along. And you meet someone who has their child at that school. You just met that person and you grab their card and you're on the fly at a networking event. You reach out to them afterwards and you say, hey, I met you at XYZ event. Hey, I know your kid is at such and such. I'd love to get my kid in there. Can you help me with that? Do not ask people for favors when you don't know them. So I think that's a networking mistake, because if you do that, I'm looking at you with one raised eyebrow. So I think that's a networking mistake. The other networking mistake is when you're reaching out to people that you don't know. If you don't give them a reason to grab onto why they should be interested, I think that's a flaw. If you're going to connect with someone, tell them why. And it could just be something complimentary. Hey, I see that you and I have a commonality in terms of we like purple elephants. Give them something. I saw you speak at, and I thought what you had to say was amazing. Give them something. So those are the two what I would call, no, I add one more, three, the threesome here. The third one is just trying to collect as many contacts as you can. This speed dating, I would call it, right? Speed dating, where you're just gathering information, but you're not doing anything with it. And then 6 months later, you decide that you're going to open the shoebox with all these cards in it, not knowing how you know this person, and just aimlessly reach out to them, not knowing how you met them. So I think those are three fatal flaws of networking, Michael.
Very good. There are so many points in all of those mistakes, which I've made. Okay, I've made all of those same mistakes and I've learned from them and I've learned what not to do. But there is so much, I can't even go into it now. Um,
But we're going to
let's
save
go.
the listeners time, right? By
We're going to
telling,
save the listeners time, okay?
yeah,
Because there's way too much for me to say. Can you share a specific example of how networking led to a significant professional milestone for you or a client?
I can. So this is, yes, this is wow. Every time I think about it, I get goosebumps. So when I was working at Johnson Controls, I was a general manager, and I was so interested I wanted to work abroad because I had an interest to be a general manager running like a large global business. But I knew my company wasn't going to allow me to do that if I could not evidence that I'm able to work outside of my home country successfully. So we went through this whole diatribe where they were like, hey, you're going to London. And it was like, you're going to Egypt. And both of those things fell apart. Then, hey, you're going to South Africa. And that one actually stuck. So I was like, okay, great. But what I started thinking about was, and this was supposed to be a year to 18 months. So I was curious about, okay, so I have to give up the role that I'm in now to take on this role. So that's one thing. But when I get back, how would I be edged back into a role? Because clearly I can't go back to what I'm leaving, because they're going to put someone else in this role. And then they're not going to say, hey, we're just going to keep your seat warm while you're gone. So I was just curious. I went to my HR person. I said, how would I go about getting reoriented back into the company? I said, because I'm a little concerned about that, but I wouldn't want to say that out loud to too many people. So I was hoping in saying that to the HR person, she would give me some nuggets that I could hold on to. And her answer was, she said, you probably need to talk to Ian Campbell. And Ian Campbell was this amazing leader in my business who reported to our business unit president. He was the person that signed off on all the expat assignments. I came to know him because he was the sponsor of one of our employee resource groups. So I knew of him just that way. She said, well, go talk to him. She said he could probably give you some advice. So now I'm like, how do I ask this question? Because I don't want him to think that, I don't know, I just didn't want it to be negative. I didn't want him to feel that I was worried, though I was worried. And he's very high in the pecking order in the company. So I go and I meet with him and I tell him about where I'm going. And he's like, yeah, I know. I'm excited because South Africa is he's from the UK. And he said South Africa is one of the favorite places for him and his wife. So that was a good opportunity to have some great dialogue. So then I said to him, I said, yeah, I was thinking about when I get back, how's the best way for me to position myself? I said, I think about companies like GE, because traditionally a GE would tell you you're going to have this role, then you're going to have this role. They could give you two or three roles forward. And in my organization, we didn't necessarily do that. I said, so what would you advise? I said, because I want to make sure that I position myself well when I return. He said, so glad you asked. And he told me a story, Michael, of someone talking about mistakes. He told me about someone who went on an expat assignment for 3 years to Europe, came back 3 years later. Leadership had changed. People had pretty much forgot that he was away. So they had to scramble around when he got back to find him something. He had to wait until something was found. So it was somewhat uncomfortable. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really don't want that. So I said, how can I avoid that? So he said, what you should do, he said, because it's really, things change quickly. He says, you want to keep yourself in front of leaders. He said, so come back every quarter and make sure that you talk to your mentors and your sponsors. Then he said, of which I will be one. So he gave me the opportunity for him to be a sponsor, which is amazing. That's a whole nother podcast, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to do that. So I did what he asked me to do. And then I knew, back to networking, he's someone that he's a triathlete. And then he loves South Africa. So every time I would come back every quarter, I would bring him something like a water bottle about South Africa. Their FIFA was in South Africa the year I was there. So I brought him like a t-shirt back from that. So just things that would resonate with him. And he was reminding me, he said, then when you know 6 months in advance when you're coming back, let me know. He said, because we need to start thinking about roles for you. He said, so a lot of times we'll have things in incubation and we can start saying, hey, we know Gisele's coming back. So I said, okay, great. So I did all the things he asked me to do. So that's the other thing I would say in relationships, follow people's instructions, right? When they give them to you. And what happened, Michael, was amazing. I was concerned about having a single job when I got back. I actually had 11 internal offers for roles.
That's nice. That's very nice. And it's so much more comforting when you know you have something to come back to
Correct.
because you can very quickly, especially in the corporate world, you can be forgotten about. And you don't want that ever to happen. So, look, very quickly, give me three actionable steps our listeners can take today to improve their networking skills. Give me three quick ones.
Sure. So the first one I would say is make a plan in terms of how you are going to follow up with your network, your general plan. How are you going to make it happen? I would start with that. Second of all, I would think about what is your goal or goals so that you can then start to think about where can I find individuals that can assist me on this journey. That might be organizations, that might be different geographies, etc. And number three, I would say begin to think about the network you already have. So, for example, if you have an undergraduate degree, those alum, that's a network for you. Think about networks that are already easy for you to actually get into. It could be if you are for example, I am in like a National Black MBA Association, for example, and they have 33 different chapters around the country. So if I wanted to expand knowing people in that industry in a particular segment, I could use that organization. So use what you already have first.
That is absolutely fantastic. You are such a great guest. Gisele, if somebody wanted to get hold of you, either for a talking, a speech, even for you to coach them, how would they get hold of you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn at Gisele Marcus, Gisele Marcus, Marcus. And I also have a website, www.giselemarcus.com. On Facebook, I am Gisele Marcus. See you there.
All right, that's good. Gisele, I'll speak with you soon.
Look forward to it, Michael. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Well, hold on, folks. Don't go anywhere. Let me just read a few of our sponsors that we have. Struggling to reach success? Maybe it's time to quit. In Quit Your Way to Success by Rodney Davis. This reveals 27 steps to breaking bad habits that hold you back. This powerful book helps you rewire your mindset, take control of your actions, and turn setbacks into stepping stones. With real life examples, motivational quotes, and actionable lessons, especially for sales professionals, you'll gain the tools to quit what's stopping you and start winning. Transform your future today. So Quit Your Way to Success by Rodney Davis, available now on Amazon. And this is a nonprofit called Revved Up Kids. This is something I believe in wholeheartedly. Revved Up Kids is on a mission to protect children and teens from sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. They provide prevention training programs for children, teens, and adults. To learn more, go to revvedupkids.org. That's REVVEDUPKIDS.org. A huge thank you to our guest for sharing such incredible insights today. And of course, a big shout out to you, our amazing listeners, for tuning in and spending your time with us. If you're interested in my digital courses, being coached, or having me come and talk to your company, just go to Michael and fill out the request form. Remember, networking isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. So take what you've learned today, get out there, and make some meaningful connections. If you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who could use a little networking inspiration. Let's keep the conversation going. You can find me on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, or my website, forman.com/podcasts.